And then we talk about the resiliency force, and this is a force of what they call the E3, but it's actually now E4. When you're talking about the Brits, the French, as well as the Germans, and now actually the Poles have a force west of the Dnieper River, which means it's out of contact.
Keith Kellogg, US Special Envoy for Ukraine, has indicated that Polish troops will be among those sent on a potential peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. Donald Tusk's government rushed to correct Kellogg. The government's decision is clear. Poland is not sending and will not send troops to Ukraine. This is simply a scenario in which we will not participate. Besides, someone is trying to draw conclusions from a program in which an American general quite freely talks about the world. Let us be serious about serious matters. The problem with the current government is that Keith Kellogg, an experienced American military officer and diplomat, was talking about the very specific terms of the agreement proposed to the parties to oversee compliance with the ceasefire in Ukraine. The image this paints is unambiguous. It is hardly surprising that the public is wondering whether there are not some negotiations going on that are being kept secret by the current government, because the presidential election campaign is underway and it could undermine them. It is quite clear that the Polish public opposes sending Polish soldiers, currently guarding NATO's eastern flank, east to Ukraine. This is especially true since the beginning of the war, Poland has been the main aid hub for Ukraine. As we know, it was the countries of the European Union that made the decision that it was necessary to send troops to Ukraine that would guarantee stability there. There was to be our country as well, because we are a large country with a large army. But as we know, our public opinion is unequivocally against this. The Tusk government has been arguing since the start of the presidential election campaign that there is no possibility of Polish soldiers going to Ukraine. In early May, this is what the head of the Defense Ministry said on the topic. You are pulling out a document that does not contain any particular mission or operation in Ukraine because none exists. After all, the President's approval is needed because it is the President, as head of the armed forces, who must agree to send Polish soldiers out of the country. In view of the total lack of support for such a decision, and in view of the real shape of Polish-Ukrainian relations, there is no justification for such a decision. Interestingly, there are rumours that the government's approach to the plan for Polish military presence in Ukraine after the elections may change 180 degrees. Such a scenario is suggested by this interview on Radio Talk FM. Tusk said Polish soldiers will not participate in a European contingent that does not exist. If it were to come to that, he didn't say in one that doesn't exist. He was discussing one that is to be created. No, he said specifically, because such a contingent does not exist. So the moment it is created and Tusk can change his mind, he can say, in this contingent, which is the one we want, we can agree to the participation of our soldiers. And in the meantime, he will score points with Mensen's anti-Ukrainian electorate. We know that in Western Europe they're saying, today is election season in Poland, so we can't pledge that Polish soldiers will go to Ukraine. But once the campaign is over, we will return to the topic on a completely different basis. There are many questions about the whole issue, also about the recent visit to Kiev by Prime Minister Donald Tusk, along with the heads of Germany, France and the United Kingdom. These are the countries that declare their readiness to send their troops to Ukraine in connection with the conflict that is currently taking place there. And Donald Tusk, among those leaders, went to Ukraine recently. Therefore, this presence of Donald Tusk among countries or coalitions of countries willing to send their troops to Ukraine is not accidental. We don't really know what was agreed upon there. Perhaps it was the details of the mission of Polish soldiers in Ukraine. Now we have a statement by Kellogg, Donald Trump's advisor on Ukraine, that there are talks with Poland to send soldiers to Ukraine. This is why the upcoming presidential election is so important. Donald Tusk is not an independent politician, and neither is his party's candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski. God forbid, if Rafał Trzaskowski becomes the head of the armed forces, he will sign whatever Donald Tusk wants. Since the coalition took power on the 13th of December 2023, it has become apparent that the current Prime Minister is doing what Berlin wants him to do. His recent visit to Kiev only confirmed this. The upcoming presidential election will show whether Donald Tusk will manage to close the system or fully consolidate power in Poland.
democracy is about contestation.
In business and in
Ideas.
politics,
It's about,
coincidences are rare,
plurality.
especially when
It's about
someone like Alex
people
Soros comes to Poland 2 days before the beginning of the pre-election silence. Officially, he came to criticize Donald Trump at an event in Poznan. Great to be back in lovely Poznan, Poland, for the Impact CEE, Europe's biggest business conference after Davos, discussing Europe's reaction to Trump's second term. In politics, just like in movies, the sequel is always worse. Political interference and attempts to influence election results are what the controversial billionaires George Soros and his son Alex specialize in. They have their favorite candidate in Poland, Rafał Trzaskowski, and they are completely open about it. It is possible that a representative of the young left-wing generation came with some money under the table. This is a major tradition for the civic platform. After all, the very founding of the party was connected with Donald Tusk and the money they received from Germany. Rafał Trzaskowski fits perfectly into the concept that the Soros family is trying to inject into the world with their money: gender ideology, the European Green Deal, and the unreflective acceptance of illegal Islamic immigrants. I have no doubts whatsoever that George Soros, along with his son, who has taken up his father's interests, have long supported Rafał Trzaskowski, grantee of the George Soros Foundation. All the more so that Rafał Trzaskowski himself has published photos with Alex Soros on the internet. For years they have been influencing the politics of the European Union, as well as other countries around the world, by all possible means. It is hard to imagine that today he would not want to have a man like Rafał Trzaskowski as a friend, if not a dependent. Soros's actions are nothing more than influencing domestic politics. We see that this left-wing international clique has played all their cards on pushing Rafał Trzaskowski through this election. The more influence you have in the economy, the more influence you have in politics. Sometimes it's direct influence and sometimes it's behind-the-scenes, under-the-table influence. It's a dangerous game because with the help of funding, various institutions, formerly George Soros and now his son Alex, try to influence politicians, and sometimes they do it directly. This is a photo from a meeting between Alex Soros and Radosław Sikorski, Poland's foreign minister. This whole leftist ideology, of which George Soros is a symbol, was implemented in Europe through successive people, leaders and politicians of various countries. In Poland, it was very well adopted by men like Rafał Trzaskowski. Rafał Trzaskowski is, one might say, an alumnus of George Soros, and his son maintains excellent relations with him. Soros cares that the scenario of conservative politicians returning to power, as happened overseas after the crushing victory of Donald Trump and Republican congressmen, does not occur in Poland. We are witnessing a very dangerous political game and attempts to save Rafał Trzaskowski by the entire Soros family. We are seeing what we observed just a few months ago during the US elections, where the left-wing establishment, think tanks, NGOs and foundations linked to specific individuals, such as the Soros family, tried to tilt the US election results. Today, the same lifeline is being thrown to Rafał Trzaskowski. Hence, the overt support for Rafał Trzaskowski just before the first round of the Polish presidential election. The Soros family takes care of their own.
The U.S. Ministry of Commerce announced that it would withdraw restrictions on the export of advanced chips using AI systems to Poland. Krzysztof Gawkowski, Minister of Digital Affairs, tried taking credit. The White House told a different story. The favorable decision for Poland was made, among others, as a result of a conversation with Polish presidential candidate Karol Nawrocki. During his visit, Nawrocki raised concerns over the Biden-era AI diffusion rule with White House officials, including Poland's classification as a Tier 2 country, citing the negative impact these restrictions have on AI innovation, investment, and diplomatic relations. Nawrocki conveyed the urgent need for a rescission of the rule. The Trump administration values candid discussions and seeks to strengthen the U.S.-Poland relationship by uniting around our shared goals. This is a blow to the civic coalition government's image as a government well-respected worldwide. Opposition politicians seem to be doing more for Poland's international relations than the ruling government. This is not only an economic signal, but also a political signal. We want to work with Poland, we want to work with Karol Nawrocki, and I think we all hope that he is elected. Keen eyes in America are meticulously watching what is happening in Poland. Freedom of speech a particularly important value for Americans, is under question in Poland. One part of this is the war against the opposition-aligned TV station, TV Republika.
Takie zachowania.
Such behavior shows that we should be talking about revoking their broadcasting license. These threats have materialized, and the Warsaw Administrative Court has decided to revoke TV Republika's license for nationwide broadcasting. The verdict, as of now, is not final. A group of U.S. congressmen has written a letter to the European Commission about the lawless behavior of Donald Tusk's government. Among the numerous examples of lawbreaking, it cited the fight against TV Republika, which amounts to censorship. In addition to targeting PIS, reports also suggest Prime Minister Tusk's government has targeted conservative Polish media. Deputy Prime Minister Krzysztof Gawkowski suggested withdrawing the broadcasting license of media outlet Telewizja Republika, a station critical of the Tusk government. Together, these actions raise concerns about whether the Tusk government is upholding the EU's democratic values and whether it will further attempt to silence its political rivals by using anti-democratic laws like the EU's Digital Services Act, DSA, to censor speech that criticizes the Tusk government. This is not the first such warning. Just a few months ago, the conservative U.S. think tank Hudson Institute published a report detailing Tusk's anti-democratic practices. There was a time where rulers in nominally democratic countries could feasibly leverage state power to censor any dissident voices. It seems such times have ended. A short and blunt message to start the day.
President Zelensky, Sky News, do you have a message for Vladimir Putin?
I think this is very clear.
Unsurprisingly, Vladimir Putin did not go to Turkey to speak with Volodymyr Zelensky. The Kremlin conveyed at the last minute that Putin was not going to Istanbul. As late as this morning, it was not quite clear what the composition of the Russian delegation was even going to be. From what we can see, the level of the delegation looks no more than decorative. We will think about what to do next, what our next steps will be after the talks with President Erdogan. I think we will have a few hours for important talks, for very important decisions. Officially, Putin spent the day in the Kremlin, listening to reports from Russian bank representatives. The Kremlin officials who flew to Turkey are known for their extremely anti-Ukrainian statements. Among them, Vladimir Medinsky, who was part of the first negotiating delegation at the beginning of the war, and Igor Kostyukov, the head of Russia's intelligence board, who has been on US and European Union sanction lists for years. Regardless of the rather low level of representation of the Russian delegation, out of respect for President Trump and out of respect for the high-ranking Turkish delegation and President Erdogan, I will try to make the first steps toward de-escalation, the first steps toward ending the war. The Americans themselves indicated that the Istanbul negotiations were to be Putin's last chance. It seems that the significant downgrading of the meeting and the wriggling of Russian diplomats lay bare the Kremlin's approach to any and all talks.
Ukraine is ready to commit to a ceasefire and immediate negotiations. That's absolutely clear. The ball is now clearly in Russia's court. They have to explain what they are doing, why they are here or not, and with what team or whatever. But let's make sure that we all understand that the ball is in their court. Ukraine is wanting to start the negotiations as soon as possible. And as I said before, it is thanks to the Americans and President Trump that the deadlock has been broken.
Donald Trump himself commented on the situation on a flight to the Arab Emirates.
Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
Will such a meeting happen anytime soon? It is doubtful. What is certain, however, is a new bundle of sanctions by Europe designed to hit Russian businesses. Europe may also be joined by America, as there is a growing talk in Washington of a new sanctions package. There is a strong movement in the U.S. Senate, where a number of senators have declared that they are ready to introduce a sanctions bill, and the U.S. administration is assuming that this will happen if Russia does not make a move. So far, the United States and Europe are looking at the issue in a similar way. While these diplomatic games are being played, the Kremlin is starting to gamble more and more recklessly in NATO airspace.
This is Estonian warship, Papa 6732. Your request will be denied.
This is footage of an attempt by an Estonian vessel to intercept a Russian ghost ship in the Baltic Sea. During the operations, a Russian fighter jet flew into Estonian airspace, performing maneuvers suggesting it was ready to open fire.
Russian Federation sent a fighter jet to check the situation, and this fighter jet violated the NATO territory close to 1 minute. This is something very new. So we need to understand that Russia has officially tied and connected itself to Russian shadow fleet. And also the NATO fighter stood up and went to inspect and check the Russian fighter.
Experts warned of a possible escalation in the Baltic Sea months ago. After a series of diversions, ships from Russia's shadow fleet damaged the underwater infrastructure in the Baltic. The appearance of a military fighter jet next to such a vessel officially links the Kremlin to the fleet it had denied. This shows that Moscow is taking yet another step toward escalation.